My wife cleaned out my accounts and ran off with her lover. I went to my daughter's place. "It's your fault," she said, as her husband threw me onto the street, yelling, "You're a burden." Homeless, I slept in an alley. The next day a butler spoke to me. "Are you Barry? My employer, a billionaire, wanted to see you before signing his will. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Barry Mitchell, and at 58 years old I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I was wrong. The morning started like any other Tuesday. I made coffee for Amanda and myself, just as I had for the past 27 years of marriage. She sat at our kitchen table scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. I should have noticed the packed suitcase by the door. I should have questioned why she was dressed so carefully for someone who claimed to be running errands. Instead, I kissed her forehead and told her I loved her, just like always. By noon, my entire world had crumbled. The first sign something was wrong came when I tried to buy lunch at the diner near my job at the auto repair shop. My debit card was declined. Embarrassed, I apologized to Martha, the waitress who'd known me for 15 years, and promised to come back tomorrow. "Don't worry about it, Barry," she said, her eyes filled with sympathy that I didn't yet understand. "Maybe there's just a problem with the bank system." But there wasn't a problem with the bank system, there was a problem with my wife. When I got home that evening, the house felt different, hollow. Amanda's car wasn't in the driveway, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the silence. No television humming in the background, no smell of dinner cooking, no sound of Amanda moving around upstairs. I found the note on our bedroom dresser, propped against the jewelry box I'd given her for our 10th anniversary. My hands shook as I unfolded the crisp white paper. "Barry, I can't pretend anymore. I'm leaving with David. I've taken what I need to start over. Don't try to find me. Amanda." David. I stared at that name, trying to place it. Then it hit me like a physical blow. David Garrett, the financial advisor Amanda had insisted we hire 2 years ago. The man who'd helped us reorganize our assets. The man who'd visited our home countless times, always with his charming smile and expensive suits. The man who had apparently been sleeping with my wife. I stumbled to the kitchen and called the bank with trembling fingers. The automated system confirmed my worst fears. Our joint checking account, $0.63. Our savings account, $0. The emergency fund we'd built over decades, gone. $42,000. Gone. I sank into my kitchen chair, the same one where Amanda had sat that morning, pretending everything was normal while planning my destruction. The weight of it all pressed down on me like a physical force. 27 years of marriage. 27 years of working double shifts to provide for her. Of sacrificing vacations and new clothes so she could have the things she wanted. 27 years of believing she loved me. All of it meant nothing. The phone rang, jolting me from my shock. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe it was Amanda calling to explain, to say it was all a mistake. "Dad." It was my daughter Sarah's voice, but there was no warmth in it, no concern. "Sarah, thank God. I know what happened." She cut me off. Her voice was cold, distant, the same tone she'd used with me since she was a teenager. "Mom called me." "Then you know I need help. The bank accounts are empty and I don't have anywhere to—" "You need help." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Dad, this is your fault. Mom told me everything. How you've been distant, how you haven't been the husband she needed. She said she's been unhappy for years." My mouth went dry. "That's not true, Sarah. I loved your mother. I gave her everything. Everything except attention. Everything except actually being present in your own marriage." Her words hit me like slaps. "Mom said you came home from work and barely spoke to her. That you were more interested in your stupid car magazines than in her feelings." I tried to speak, to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. Had I been distant? I worked 10-hour days to keep us comfortable. When I came home, I was exhausted, but I'd always thought Amanda understood. "I'm coming over," I finally managed. "We need to talk about this face to face." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "You're not welcome here, Dad. Brad and I have talked about it. We can't have this kind of drama around the kids." Brad. Her husband of 8 years, the man who'd never liked me, who'd always made it clear he thought I wasn't good enough for his wife's family. "Sarah, I'm your father. I have nowhere else to go." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you drove Mom away." The line went dead. I sat in the growing darkness of my empty house, Amanda's words echoing in my mind. "I've taken what I need to start over." She'd taken everything. Not just the money, but my daughter's loyalty, my sense of security, my entire understanding of who I was. But I couldn't just sit there. I had to try again. I had to make Sarah understand. An hour later, I stood on my daughter's front porch in the affluent neighborhood where she lived with Brad and their 2 young children. The house was a testament to Brad's success as a corporate lawyer. Manicured lawn, expensive cars in the driveway, the kind of life I'd always dreamed of providing for my family but never could. Sarah opened the door before I could knock. She must have seen my headlights in the driveway. "I told you not to come here," she said, blocking the doorway with her body. "Sarah, please. I just need a place to stay while I figure this out. Maybe the couch, just for a few days." "Absolutely not." Brad appeared behind her, his tall frame imposing in the doorway. He was still wearing his work clothes, expensive suit, silk tie, everything that screamed success and respectability. Everything I wasn't. "Dad, you need to leave," Sarah said, but her voice wavered slightly. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of the little girl who used to run to me when I came home from work. "I'm your father," I said desperately. "I raised you. I worked 2 jobs to pay for your college, to give you the wedding you wanted. Doesn't that count for anything?" Brad stepped forward, his face hard. "What counts is that you're a grown man who apparently couldn't keep his wife happy or his finances in order. We're not going to enable your dysfunction." "My dysfunction?" The words came out louder than I intended. "I was betrayed. My wife of 27 years cleaned out our accounts and ran off with another man." "Keep your voice down," Brad hissed, glancing towards the windows where neighbors might be listening. "We have a reputation in this neighborhood." "Brad, please." I turned to Sarah, ignoring him. "Honey, I know we haven't been close lately, but I'm still your father. I'm still family." Sarah's face crumpled for just a moment, and I thought she might relent. Then Brad's hand landed on her shoulder, and her expression hardened again. "You're not family," she said quietly. "Family doesn't let this kind of thing happen. Family doesn't come to their daughter's house begging like some kind of vagrant." The word vagrant hit me like a physical blow. "Sarah, you're a burden," Brad exploded, his lawyer's composure finally cracking. "Do you understand that? My wife has spent years trying to have a relationship with you, and all you've done is take her time, take her emotional energy, and now you want to take our security too." He stepped onto the porch, and for a moment I thought he might hit me. Instead, he grabbed my arm and pushed me toward the steps. "Get off my property. If you come back, I'll call the police." I stumbled down the 3 steps to their walkway, my knees weak. When I turned back, Sarah was crying, but she didn't stop Brad from slamming the door. I stood there in their perfect suburban street, under the glow of expensive streetlights, listening to the sound of their deadbolt sliding into place. Through the window I could see them talking, Brad's arms moving animatedly, Sarah wiping her eyes. Inside their warm, safe house, my grandchildren were probably getting ready for bed. 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jake, who barely knew their grandfather because Sarah had always kept me at arm's length, claiming I was too tired or too stressed to be good company for children. Maybe she'd been right. I got back in my 15-year-old pickup truck and drove aimlessly through the city streets. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd believed in was gone. My wife, my daughter, my home, all of it might as well have belonged to someone else now. As the night grew colder, I realized I literally had nowhere to go. The house was in Amanda's name, something David Garrett had suggested for tax purposes. My credit cards were maxed out from home repairs Amanda had insisted were necessary. I had $23 in my wallet and a tank of gas that was nearly empty. At 58 years old, I was homeless. I parked behind a grocery store in an alley that reeked of rotting food and urine. The smell made my stomach turn, but it was dark and hidden from view. I locked the doors and tried to sleep in the front seat, but every sound made me jump. Footsteps, car engines, voices. They all seemed threatening in ways they never had before. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, as I shivered in my thin work shirt, I finally understood the full scope of what Amanda had done. She hadn't just taken my money. She had systematically destroyed everything that connected me to the life I'd built. My daughter believed I was to blame. My savings were gone. Even my sense of self-worth had been carefully eroded over years of subtle criticism and emotional distance. I had been so busy trying to be a good provider that I'd never noticed I was being prepared for disposal. As dawn broke over the alley, painting everything in harsh, unforgiving light, I realized that at 58 years old, I was starting over with less than nothing. I was starting over with the knowledge that the people I'd loved most in the world had looked at me and decided I wasn't worth saving. But I had no idea that this was only the beginning, and that sometimes the darkest moment comes just before the most unexpected dawn. The second day was worse than the first. I woke up in my truck with a crick in my neck that felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through my spine. The morning sun was already blazing through the windshield, turning my small cab into an oven. The smell of garbage from the dumpster nearby mixed with the stale odor of my own body. I hadn't showered since Monday, and it was now Thursday. Had it really only been 2 days since my world collapsed? My stomach cramped with hunger. The gas station coffee and stale donut I'd managed to afford yesterday were long gone, and my $23 had dwindled to $16 after buying the cheapest meal I could find. At this rate, I'd be completely broke by the weekend. I started the truck and drove to a McDonald's, hoping to use their restroom to clean up. The teenage manager took one look at me, unshaven, wearing the same wrinkled work clothes for the third day straight, and shook his head. "Restrooms are for paying customers only," he said, crossing his arms. "I understand. I'll buy something." I ordered a $1 menu coffee, my hands shaking as I counted out the exact change. In the open bathroom mirror, I barely recognized myself. My hair was greasy and sticking up at odd angles. My eyes were bloodshot and hollow. The stubble on my face made me look old and defeated. When had I become this person? I splashed cold water on my face and tried to finger-comb my hair into something resembling respectability. It didn't help much. I still looked like exactly what I was, a homeless man trying to pretend he belonged in civilized society. Back at my truck, I sat in the McDonald's parking lot and tried to think. I needed a plan. I needed to find work, but who would hire someone who looked like he'd been sleeping in his car? I needed an address to put on applications, but I didn't have one. I needed references, but Amanda had been right about one thing. I'd been so focused on work and providing that I'd never made real friends. My phone rang, and for a wild moment I thought it might be Sarah calling to apologize. Instead, it was my supervisor at the auto shop. "Barry, where the hell are you? You missed your shift yesterday and today. Martinez is having to pull double duty." "I'm sorry, Tom. I've had some personal issues." "Look, I like you, Barry, but this is a business. If you can't show up reliably, I've got to let you go." I closed my eyes. My job. The one thing I still had left. "Please, Tom. Just give me a few more days. My wife left me, and I'm trying to get back on my feet." There was silence on the other end, then Tom's voice, softer but still firm. "I'm sorry to hear that, buddy. I really am. But I can't run a shop with unreliable mechanics. Clean out your locker by Monday." He hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, the last connection to my old life now severed. No job. No income. No hope of getting back on my feet. The despair hit me like a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I put my head in my hands and tried not to cry in a McDonald's parking lot, like some kind of pathetic old man. But that's exactly what I was, wasn't it? As the day wore on, I found myself driving aimlessly through neighborhoods I used to know. Past the house where Amanda and I had lived, where she was probably packing up the last of her things before David Garrett helped her start her new life. Past the elementary school where Sarah had gone, where I'd attended exactly 2 parent-teacher conferences in 6 years because I was always working. Past the park where I'd taken Sarah exactly 3 times, I realized with a stab of guilt. 3 times in 18 years. No wonder she thought I'd been absent. The memories came flooding back, each one more painful than the last. Sarah at age 6, sitting at the kitchen table with her homework spread out in front of her. "Daddy, can you help me with my math?" "Ask your mother, honey. Daddy's tired." Sarah at 10, dressed up for her school play. "Are you coming to see me tonight, Daddy?" "I have to work late, sweetheart, but Mommy will take pictures." Sarah at 16, standing in the kitchen in her prom dress. How do I look, Dad? I'd barely looked up from the bills I was sorting through. You look fine, honey. Have fun. Had I really been such a terrible father? I thought I was doing the right thing, working extra shifts to pay for her dance lessons, her college fund, her wedding. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe providing money wasn't the same as being present. Maybe Amanda was right, too. When was the last time I'd really talked to her, asked about her day, shown interest in anything beyond making sure the bills were paid? I'd been so focused on being responsible, on being the provider, that I'd forgotten to be a husband and father. The realization sat in my stomach like a stone. By evening, I was parked behind a different store, in a different alley, trying to find a spot that didn't smell quite as bad as the previous night. I'd spent $4 more on another cheap meal, leaving me with $12 to my name. As darkness fell, I watched other homeless people emerge from wherever they spent their days. An older woman pushing a shopping cart full of belongings. A younger man with hollow eyes and track marks on his arms. A couple arguing in slurred voices about where to sleep. Was this my future? Was this who I was now? A tap on my passenger window made me jump. An elderly black man stood outside, gesturing for me to roll down the window. Against my better judgment, I cracked it open. "You new to this?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Thought so. You've got that look. Like you still think this is temporary." He studied my face with eyes that had seen too much. "Name's Walter. Been on the streets for about 15 years now." 15 years? The number horrified me. Walter chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Started out just like you. Lost my job, wife left me, kids stopped talking to me. Figured I'd bounce back in a few weeks. That was in 2008. The hopelessness in his voice chilled me more than the night air. "You got any family?" Walter asked. I thought about Sarah, about the way she'd looked at me before Brad slammed the door. "Not anymore." "That's rough. Family's usually the last thing to go." Walter shifted the torn blanket around his shoulders. "Most folks, they get 1 or 2 kicks at the can. Family gives them a chance to get back up. When family turns their back," he shrugged. "Well, that's when you know you're really alone." "How do you do it?" I whispered. "How do you survive this?" Walter was quiet for a long moment. "You learn to let go of who you used to be. The man who had a wife, a job, a future. That man's dead. You got to figure out who you are now. I don't know who I am without those things. That's the problem right there." Walter pointed a gnarled finger at me. "You think you are what you do, what you have. But when all that gets stripped away, what's left?" I stared at him, unable to answer. "Maybe you will figure it out. Maybe you won't. But I'll tell you one thing. Sitting in that truck feeling sorry for yourself ain't gonna change nothing. Tomorrow's gonna come whether you're ready or not." With that, Walter shuffled away into the darkness, leaving me alone with his words. I tried to sleep, but every sound made me jolt awake. Sirens in the distance, voices echoing off the alley walls. The constant fear that someone might try to break into the truck, take what little I had left. Somewhere around midnight, it started to rain. Water leaked through a crack in my windshield, dripping steadily onto my already damp clothes. I tried to position myself to avoid it, but there was nowhere to go. I thought about Sarah, warm and dry in her perfect house with her perfect husband and her beautiful children. I thought about Amanda, probably in some nice hotel room with David, planning their new life together. And I thought about Walter's words. Who was I without my job, without my family, without my role as provider? I'd spent 58 years defining myself by what I could give others. Now that I had nothing left to give, was there anything left of me at all? As the rain drummed against the roof of my truck, I realized I was about to find out. Whether I wanted to or not, I was going to discover what kind of man Barry Mitchell really was when everything else was stripped away. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly imagine as I shivered in that leaking truck in a garbage-scented alley, was that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover you were never really lost at all. The 5th day on the streets started like all the others, with the crushing weight of reality pressing down on my chest before I was even fully awake. I'd found a new spot behind a closed restaurant, tucked between 2 dumpsters that provided some shelter from the wind. The smell was nauseating, but I'd learned that comfort was a luxury I could no longer afford. My truck had finally run out of gas the night before, leaving me truly stranded. $8.37. That's all I had left in the world. I was sitting on a piece of cardboard I'd found, trying to work up the courage to ask strangers for money, something I'd never imagined I'd have to do, when I heard footsteps approaching. Different footsteps. Not the shuffling gait of another homeless person or the hurried clip of someone trying to avoid eye contact with the human debris behind the building. These footsteps were measured, deliberate. Expensive shoes on concrete. I looked up and nearly choked on the stale water I was sipping from a discarded bottle. A man in an impeccable grey suit was walking toward me. Not just any suit, the kind that cost more than I used to make in 3 months. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his posture ramrod straight despite what appeared to be advanced age. He carried himself like royalty, completely out of place in this garbage-strewn alley. He stopped directly in front of me, and I instinctively tried to shrink back against the brick wall. Rich people didn't usually seek out conversations with the homeless, and when they did, it was rarely for good reasons. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice cultured and precise. British accent, I realized. "Are you Barry Mitchell?" My mouth went dry. How did this stranger know my name? "Who's asking?" I managed to croak, my voice rough from days of disuse. The man reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a leather business card holder. He extracted a cream-colored card and held it out to me with white-gloved hands. "My name is Reginald Ashworth," he said formally. "I am the personal assistant to Mr. Robert Montgomery. My employer has been searching for you, Mr. Mitchell, for quite some time." I stared at the business card, afraid to touch it. The name Robert Montgomery meant nothing to me, but something about this entire situation felt surreal, like a hallucination brought on by hunger and desperation. "I think you have the wrong person," I said finally. "I don't know any Robert Montgomery." Reginald's expression didn't change. "Are you Barry James Mitchell, born on the March 15th, 1965, at St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago?" The specific details sent a chill through me. "How do you know that?" "Are you the son of Margaret Mitchell, formerly Margaret Collins, and David Mitchell?" I nodded slowly, completely bewildered. "Then you are indeed the person Mr. Montgomery has been seeking." Reginald's voice took on an urgent tone. "Sir, I must ask you to come with me immediately. Mr. Montgomery is quite ill, and he specifically requested to see you before—" He paused delicately. "Before his affairs are finalized." "Before he dies, you mean?" "Precisely." I struggled to my feet, my legs weak from hunger and cold. "Look, Mr. Ashworth, I appreciate the formal approach and all, but I think there's been a mistake. I've never heard of Robert Montgomery, and I can't imagine why some rich guy would be looking for me. Especially now." I gestured to my filthy clothes, my unshaven face, my cardboard seat. Reginald studied me with pale blue eyes that seemed to see everything. "Mr. Mitchell, what I'm about to tell you may come as a shock. Mr. Montgomery believes you are his brother." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's impossible. I don't have a brother." "Not just any brother, sir, his twin brother." I actually laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the alley walls. "Twin brother? Are you insane? I think I would know if I had a twin brother." But even as I said it, fragments of childhood memories began surfacing, vague recollections of my parents whispering in hushed tones when they thought I wasn't listening. The way my mother sometimes looked at me with an expression I could never quite understand. Not just love, but something that looked almost like guilt. "Mr. Mitchell," Reginald said gently, "I understand this is difficult to process. Perhaps it would be easier if you spoke directly with Mr. Montgomery. He can explain the circumstances far better than I." "Where is he?" "The Peninsula Hotel, the penthouse suite." "Of course, the most expensive hotel in the city." I looked down at myself, dirty, unshaven, wearing clothes I'd slept in for almost a week. "I can't go to a place like that looking like this. They'll call security the moment I walk through the door." "That has already been arranged, sir. I have a car waiting, and we've prepared appropriate attire for you at the hotel." I stared at him, trying to process what was happening. A twin brother I'd never known about, a wealthy man on his deathbed who wanted to see me. It sounded like something out of a movie, not real life. "Why now?" I asked. If this Robert Montgomery is really my brother, where has he been for 58 years? Reginald's expression grew sad. That, Mr. Mitchell, is a question only he can answer. But I will say this. He has been searching for you for most of his adult life. The old man stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of expensive cologne that reminded me of a life I'd never lived. Sir, I must be frank. Mr. Montgomery's condition is deteriorating rapidly. The doctors believe he has perhaps days, possibly hours. If you wish to meet your brother, if you wish to understand your family's history, this may be your only opportunity. I thought about Walter's words from the other night, about letting go of who I used to be and figuring out who I was now. Maybe this was part of that process. Maybe I was meant to follow this strange, impeccably dressed man into whatever came next. What do I have to lose? I muttered, more to myself than to Reginald. Precisely, sir. The car was a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow, gleaming black with chrome that reflected the afternoon sun like a mirror. The driver, another man in an expensive uniform, opened the rear door without a word. I hesitated at the curb, acutely aware of how out of place I looked. Sir, Reginald said softly, whatever has brought you to these circumstances, whatever pain you are carrying, Mr. Montgomery understands suffering. He will not judge you. I climbed into the back seat, sinking into leather that was softer than any bed I'd ever slept in. As we pulled away from the alley, I watched my cardboard seat and trash bag pillow disappear in the side mirror. The drive through the city felt like traveling through different worlds, from the industrial wasteland where I'd been surviving to neighborhoods of increasing affluence, until finally we pulled up in front of the Peninsula Hotel. The doorman didn't even blink when I stepped out of the Rolls-Royce, despite my appearance. Reginald had clearly prepared them. In the elevator rising toward the penthouse, I caught sight of myself in the polished brass doors. I looked like a vagrant who'd accidentally wandered into a fairy tale. Mr. Mitchell, Reginald said as we reached the top floor, before we go in, you should know that Mr. Montgomery's appearance may be startling. The cancer has been quite aggressive. Cancer. The word sent a chill through me. The penthouse suite was larger than any home I'd ever been in. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the furnishings looked like they belonged in a museum. But I barely noticed any of it, because sitting in a wheelchair near the windows was a man who looked exactly like me. Not similar, exactly like me. The same brown hair, though his was silver now and thinning from chemotherapy. The same blue eyes, though his were sunken and tired. The same facial structure, the same hands, even the same scar on his chin from a childhood accident I'd always assumed was unique to me. He was wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my truck, and despite his obvious illness, he carried himself with an dignity I'd never possessed. This was a man who'd lived a life of power and influence. This was a man who looked like he could be my reflection in a funhouse mirror, the version of me that had taken a completely different path through life. Barry, he said, his voice weak but warm. My God, look at you. You're exactly what I expected, and nothing like what I hoped. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak. Please, he said, gesturing to a chair near his wheelchair. Sit down. We have so much to talk about, and I'm afraid we have very little time. As I moved toward the chair on unsteady legs, Robert Montgomery, my alleged twin brother, studied my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. You don't remember me at all, do you? He asked quietly. I shook my head. I didn't think you would. You were too young when they separated us. His voice carried a weight of old pain. But Barry, I need you to know something before we go any further. I never stopped looking for you. Not once in 43 years. 43 years. The number stunned me. But we're 58. They separated us when we were 15, Robert said. The day after our 15th birthday, to be exact. March 16th, 1980. The date meant nothing to me, but the anguish in his voice was unmistakable. I don't understand, I said. Separated how? Why? Robert's eyes filled with tears, and suddenly I was looking at a mirror image of my own capacity for pain. Because our parents decided they only wanted one son. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. I felt something fundamental shift inside me, as if the ground I'd been standing on my entire life had suddenly revealed itself to be nothing more than an illusion. That's impossible, I whispered. I wish it were, Robert said. But Barry, there's something else you need to know. Something that's going to change everything you thought you understood about your life. He leaned forward in his wheelchair, his eyes meeting mine with desperate intensity. The family that raised you, the Mitchells, they weren't our real parents. The words echoed in my mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. The family that raised you, they weren't our real parents. I gripped the arms of the leather chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. What are you talking about? David and Margaret Mitchell were my parents. I have their last name. I have birth certificates, childhood photos. Robert wheeled his chair closer to mine, his movements deliberate despite his obvious weakness. Photos that were carefully curated. Documents that were expertly forged. Barry, our real last name is Montgomery. We were born Robert and Barry Montgomery on March 15, 1965, to Charles and Eleanor Montgomery. That's insane. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The city sprawled below us, but I barely saw it. Why would anyone do that? Why would my parents, the Mitchells, why would they lie to me about something like that? Because they were paid to. The simple statement hit me like a physical blow. I turned back to face Robert, searching his gaunt face for any sign that this was some kind of elaborate joke. Paid by whom? Our real parents. Robert's voice was bitter now, years of pain and anger seeping through his controlled facade. Charles and Eleanor Montgomery owned one of the largest shipping companies on the East Coast. They also owned textile mills, real estate, and a significant portion of the steel industry in Pennsylvania. He gestured to the opulent suite around us. They were billionaires, Barry. And they decided that raising twin boys was too much trouble. I sank back into the chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. But why separate us? If they didn't want children, why not give us both away? Robert's laugh was hollow, devoid of any humor. Because they wanted an heir, someone to carry on the Montgomery name and fortune. They just didn't want the inconvenience of raising two children. He reached into a leather portfolio beside his wheelchair and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. It took me 30 years and the best private investigators money could buy to piece this together, he said, handing me the folder. Our parents made a calculated decision when we turned 15. They would keep one son, the one they perceived as more promising, and quietly dispose of the other. Dispose of? The word made my stomach turn. Poor choice of words. They arranged for you to be adopted by a working-class family who desperately wanted a child. The Mitchells couldn't have children of their own, and they were struggling financially. Our parents offered them $50,000, a fortune to them in 1980, to take you in and never ask questions. I opened the folder with trembling hands. The first document was a legal agreement dated March the 20th, 1980. My eyes scanned the formal language until I found the relevant section. In exchange for the sum of $50,000, David and Margaret Mitchell agreed to assume guardianship of the minor child known as Barry Montgomery, hereafter to be known as Barry Mitchell. The paper slipped from my numb fingers. They bought me, I whispered. They bought your silence, Robert corrected, and your absence from my life. I looked up at him, this stranger who shared my face. But why you? Why did they choose to keep you instead of me? Robert's expression grew pained. Because I was sick. Sick how? Childhood leukemia. I was diagnosed when we were 12. He touched his thinning hair unconsciously. The doctors said I might not survive to adulthood. Our parents couldn't stand the thought of their heir being weak, possibly dying, so they focused all their attention on the healthy son. Me. You. But then, ironically, I recovered. Completely. By the time we were 15, I was healthier than I'd been in years. But by then, our parents had already made their choice. They'd grown attached to the son they thought they might lose, and they'd grown accustomed to your absence. I stared at the legal documents scattered around my feet. So, they just gave me away? They told you we were going on a family vacation, remember? A trip to see relatives in Chicago? Fragments of memory began surfacing. A long car ride. My parents, the people I'd thought were my parents, acting strangely nervous. Arriving at an unfamiliar house where a man and woman I'd never seen before welcomed me with forced smiles. I remember, I said slowly. David and Margaret picked me up from what I thought was a relative's house. They said my real parents had been killed in a car accident, and they were going to take care of me from now on. A convenient lie. Robert's voice was harsh. While you were being told that story, I was being told that you'd died of the same cancer they thought was going to kill me. Our parents thought it was poetic justice in a way. They told me you'd succumbed to leukemia while I'd survived. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They let you think I was dead? For 43 years. Robert's eyes filled with tears again. I mourned you, Barry. I grieved for my twin brother, my other half. I even had a headstone made for you in the family cemetery. I felt sick to my stomach. And our real parents, Charles and Eleanor, dead. Father died of a heart attack 10 years ago. Mother passed from Alzheimer's 3 years later. Robert's voice was matter-of-fact, but I could hear the underlying pain. They took their secret to the grave. I only discovered the truth about you when I was going through their private papers after Mother's funeral. That was 3 years ago. Why didn't you find me sooner? Robert wheeled closer, his expression urgent. I tried. God, how I tried. But the Mitchells had done their job well. They'd moved you several times during your childhood, always staying just ahead of my investigators. They were terrified that if I found you, I'd expose what they'd done. He pulled another document from the folder. This is a report from the private detective I hired in 2020. He finally tracked down Margaret Mitchell in a nursing home in Ohio. She was in the early stages of dementia, but she remembered enough to tell him the truth. Is she still alive? She died 2 years ago, but before she passed, she gave him your last known address. That's how we found you working at the auto shop. You've been watching me? Robert nodded. I had to be sure it was really you, and I had to figure out how to approach you. How do you tell someone that their entire life has been a lie? I stood up again, needing to move, to process what I was hearing. The people I thought were my parents, David and Margaret, they knew they were lying to me every day for over 40 years. They did what they thought they had to do to survive. Robert said quietly. $50,000 was life-changing money for them. But Barry, there's more. More? I couldn't imagine what else there could be. Robert opened another section of the folder. The agreement our real parents made with the Mitchells wasn't just about adoption. It included a clause that if anything happened to me, if I died or became incapacitated, you would automatically inherit everything. I stared at him. Everything? The Montgomery fortune. All of it. Our parents might have been cruel enough to separate us, but they weren't stupid. They wanted to ensure that their bloodline would continue, one way or another. The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. How much are we talking about? At current valuation, approximately $2.7 billion. The number was so large it didn't seem real. Billion? Billion. Robert's voice was steady. Companies, properties, investments, art collections. An empire built over 4 generations. I couldn't breathe. And you're dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me weeks, possibly days. So I'm about to inherit everything. Robert leaned back in his wheelchair, looking exhausted. But Barry, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about money. This is about justice. This is about finally bringing our family back together, even if it's 43 years too late. I walked to the window, staring out at the city where I'd been homeless just hours ago. Somewhere down there was the alley where I'd been sleeping. The garbage and desperation I'd thought would be my new reality. I don't understand, I said finally. If you've known about me for 3 years, why wait until now to make contact? Why wait until you're dying? Robert was quiet for so long I thought he might have fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was angry. Angry? At you. At the life you got to live. He wiped away tears that had started flowing freely. You were adopted by people who, despite their deception, clearly cared about you. You got to have a normal childhood, go to school, make friends, eventually get married and have a family. You got to be ordinary. Ordinary? I laughed bitterly. My wife just cleaned out my bank account and ran off with another man. My daughter won't speak to me. I've been homeless for almost a week. But you got to try, Robert said fiercely. You got to experience love, marriage, fatherhood. You got to fail and succeed on your own terms. Do you know what my life has been like? I turned to face him, seeing the pain etched into every line of his face. Tutors instead of schools, business meetings instead of friendships, boardrooms instead of family dinners. I've never been married, Barry. I've never had children. I've never even been in love because I was too busy being the Montgomery heir, carrying on the family legacy. He gestured around the luxurious suite. All of this wealth, all of this power. It's been a prison. And you, my brother, my twin, my other half, you were out there living a real life while I was trapped in the gilded cage our parents built. But you could have left. You could have walked away from all of it. Robert shook his head. No, I couldn't. Because I thought you were dead. Because I thought I was the only one left to carry on the Montgomery name. I felt responsible for honoring the memory of the brother I'd lost. The irony was devastating. While I'd been struggling to provide for my family, working double shifts and missing important moments, my twin brother had been living in luxury while mourning my supposed death. So why now? I asked again. Why contact me when you're dying instead of 3 years ago when you'd learned the truth? Robert met my eyes with an expression of profound regret. Because I was a coward. Because I was afraid that if I found you, you'd be everything I'd never been allowed to be. And I was right. He wheeled closer to me. But the cancer changes things. Knowing I'm going to die makes the anger seem petty and meaningless. All that matters now is that we have whatever time is left. I looked at this man who was simultaneously a stranger and my mirror image, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in days. Hope. But there was something else too, a nagging question that I couldn't quite put into words. Robert, I said slowly, you said our parents wanted to ensure their bloodline continued, but if they were so concerned about that, why take such a huge risk? What if something had happened to you before you found me? What if I died in the meantime? Robert's expression changed, becoming guarded. What do you mean? I mean, leaving a $2.7 billion fortune to chance seems like poor planning for people who built a business empire. Barry? What aren't you telling me? Robert looked away, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair. There's one more thing, something I haven't figured out how to tell you. The hope I'd just begun to feel started to crumble. What? Our parents' plan wasn't just about having one heir, it was about having the right heir. Robert's voice was barely audible. They didn't just think I was more promising than you, Barry. They thought you were damaged. Damaged how? Robert met my eyes, and I saw a reflection of my own deepest fears staring back at me. They believed you would never amount to anything. They thought you would waste the family fortune, embarrass the family name. They gave you away because they were convinced you were fundamentally flawed. The words hit me like a physical assault. And you? Do you think they were right? Robert looked at me. Really looked at me. Taking in my dirty clothes, my unshaven face, my obvious desperation. I saw the exact moment when he made his judgment, and my heart broke all over again, because for just a second, just one devastating second, I saw doubt in his eyes. The doubt in Robert's eyes lasted only a moment, but it was enough to shatter something inside me that I didn't even know was still intact. I stood there in that opulent penthouse suite, wearing clothes that reeked of garbage and desperation, and I saw myself through the eyes of my dying twin brother. I saw what everyone else saw. A 58-year-old failure whose wife had abandoned him, whose daughter had rejected him, who had been sleeping in alleys like a common vagrant. Maybe our parents had been right about me after all. I should go, I said quietly, moving toward the door. Barry, no. Robert's voice was sharp, desperate. Please don't leave, I didn't mean... Yes, you did. I turned to face him, and for the first time since entering this surreal world of wealth and revelation, I felt calm. And you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe they were all right. That's not true. Isn't it? I gestured to myself. Look at me, Robert. Really look at me. My wife cleaned out our accounts and ran off with her financial advisor. My daughter thinks I'm a burden. I lost my job because I couldn't cope with my problems like an adult. I've been homeless for less than a week, and I'm already broken. I walked back to the chair where I'd been sitting and picked up one of the legal documents from the floor. Meanwhile, you built something from nothing. You survived cancer as a child. You managed a business empire worth billions. Even dying, you have more dignity than I've ever possessed. Robert wheeled his chair to block my path to the door. You think money and business success make someone worthy? You think having dignity while dying makes up for never really living? It makes you more than I am. No. His voice was fierce now, stronger than it had been since I'd arrived. It makes me exactly what our parents wanted, a hollow vessel carrying the Montgomery name. But you, Barry, you became a real person. A real failure. A real human being. Robert reached out and grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Do you know what I would give to have experienced what you call failure? To have loved someone enough to work double shifts for them, even if they didn't appreciate it. To have raised a child, even if that relationship became complicated. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. You think Amanda leaving you makes you weak? I've never even risked being left by anyone because I've never allowed myself to care that deeply. You think Sarah rejecting you makes you a bad father? I don't even know what it feels like to have someone call me dad. Tears were streaming down his face now, and I realized this wasn't just about me. This was about 43 years of loneliness and regret. I've been dying for 3 months, Barry, and do you know how many people have visited me? Business associates, lawyers, doctors, that's it. No one who loves me. No one who will miss me for who I was rather than what I represented. He released my arm and slumped back in his wheelchair, looking more fragile than ever. When I saw that doubt in my eyes just now, it wasn't about you. It was about me. It was me realizing that despite all my wealth and success, I'm the one who turned out to be fundamentally flawed. I sank back into the chair, overwhelmed. We're quite a pair, aren't we? The twin who was given away and the twin who was kept. Both of us convinced we're the defective one. Maybe that was their greatest cruelty, Robert said softly. Not just separating us, but making each of us believe we were insufficient. We sat in silence for several minutes, two broken men who shared the same face and the same wounds, inflicted by people who should have protected us instead of treating us like commodities to be managed. Finally, Robert spoke again. Barry, I need to tell you something else. Something about the inheritance. I looked up at him warily. What now? It's not automatic. There are conditions. Of course there were. What kind of conditions? Robert reached into his portfolio and withdrew another document, this one sealed in a cream-colored envelope. Our parents were thorough in their planning. The will specifies that if I die without direct heirs, you inherit everything, but only if you meet certain criteria. Such as, you have to prove that you are worthy of the Montgomery name. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. And how exactly am I supposed to do that? I can barely prove I'm worthy of a minimum wage job right now. That's just it, Robert said, his voice growing urgent. The criteria aren't what you'd expect. They're not about business acumen or financial success. He handed me the envelope. Open it. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the document inside. The language was formal, legal, but as I read through it, one section stood out. To inherit the Montgomery estate, the surviving heir must demonstrate the following qualities. The ability to forgive those who have wronged him. The strength to walk away from revenge when justice would be easier. The wisdom to understand that true wealth lies not in accumulation but in the relationships we build and the lives we touch. I read it twice, then looked up at Robert in confusion. This doesn't sound like something our parents would have written. Because they didn't write it. Robert's smile was sad but genuine. I did. 3 weeks ago, when the doctors told me I had less than a month to live. You wrote your own inheritance conditions. I rewrote the entire will. Robert leaned forward, his eyes bright with something that looked like hope. Barry, our parents may have been cruel enough to separate us, but they're dead. I'm the one who gets to decide what the Montgomery legacy becomes. I stared at the document, trying to process what he was telling me. You changed the conditions of your own will? The lawyers fought me on it, said I wasn't thinking clearly because of the medication. But I was thinking more clearly than I had in years. Robert's voice grew stronger. I realized that if I was going to leave you everything our parents built, I wanted to make sure you wouldn't become what they turned me into. And what's that? Someone who values wealth over people. Someone who sees relationships as transactions. Someone who mistakes isolation for independence. I looked down at the conditions again. The ability to forgive those who have wronged him. Amanda, Sarah, even our parents if you can manage it. The strength to walk away from revenge when justice would be easier. You could destroy Amanda financially with the resources you'll inherit. You could make Sarah regret rejecting you. You could expose everyone who ever hurt you. The wisdom to understand that true wealth lies not in accumulation but in relationships. Use the money to build bridges, not walls. Connect with people instead of acquiring things. I set the document down and looked at my dying brother. What if I can't do it? What if I'm too angry, too hurt, too broken? Then the money goes to charity and the Montgomery name dies with me. Robert's expression was serene. But, Barry, I don't think that's going to happen. Why not? Because you've already started. You forgave the Mitchells for lying to you, even after learning the truth. You haven't spent the last hour planning revenge against Amanda or Sarah. You've been focused on understanding, on processing, on trying to make sense of something senseless. He was right, I realized. I was angry at Amanda, hurt by Sarah's rejection, devastated by my parents' betrayal. But I wasn't plotting to hurt them back. There's something else, Robert said. A time limit. Of course there is. You have 6 months to demonstrate that you meet the criteria. 6 months to show that you can forgive, that you can choose healing over revenge, that you can build a life based on genuine relationships rather than transactions. And who decides if I've met the criteria? Robert smiled. You do? What? At the end of 6 months, you will write a letter to the executors explaining whether or not you believe you've fulfilled the conditions. If you say yes, you inherit everything. If you say no, the money goes to various charities. That's insane. What's to stop me from just lying? Nothing. Robert's smile widened. That's the point. If you're the kind of person who would lie about this, then you're not the kind of person who should inherit the Montgomery fortune. I stood up and walked to the window again, watching the city lights begin to flicker on as afternoon faded to evening. Somewhere down there, Amanda was probably having dinner with David Garrett, planning their future with my money. Somewhere down there, Sarah was tucking my grandchildren into bed, glad that she didn't have to deal with her burden of a father. And here I was, being offered more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, with conditions that essentially required me to become a better person than I'd ever been. What happens if I just walk away? I asked without turning around. What if I don't want any of it? Then you walk away, Robert said simply. No one will stop you. But Barry, can I ask you something? What? What do you want? Not what you think you should want, not what would be practical or reasonable. What do you actually want? I thought about the question for a long time, watching the city transform from day to night below me. I want to matter, I said finally. I want my life to have meant something. I want to be someone that people remember fondly, not someone they're relieved to be rid of. Then take the challenge, Robert said softly. Not for the money, but for the chance to become who you were meant to be. I turned back to face him, this stranger who shared my face and my pain. What about you? I asked. What do you want? Robert's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they looked like tears of relief rather than regret. I want to spend whatever time I have left getting to know my brother. I want to tell you stories about our childhood that you don't remember. I want to learn about your life, about Sarah, about who you became despite everything that was done to us. He paused, wiping his eyes with a trembling hand. And I want to believe that when I die, the Montgomery name will finally represent something good in this world. As I looked at Robert, frail, dying, but somehow more hopeful than he'd been when I arrived, I realized that the test wasn't really about proving I was worthy of the inheritance. It was about proving I was worthy of being his brother, and maybe, just maybe, worthy of being myself. 6 months and 3 Weeks later, I sat in a small cafe in Portland, Oregon, 2,000 miles away from the alley where my old life had ended and my real life had begun. The letter in my hands was addressed to Harrison, Blackwood and Associates, the law firm handling Robert's estate. I'd written and rewritten it 17 times over the past month, and I still wasn't sure I had the words right. But then again, maybe that was the point. Robert had died peacefully on a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 5 weeks after our first meeting. I'd spent every day of those 5 weeks with him, listening to stories about our childhood, sharing memories of my own life, and slowly piecing together who we might have been if we'd grown up together. He told me about the dreams he'd had as a child, dreams where he wasn't alone, where there was someone who looked just like him to share the burden of being a Montgomery. I told him about the strange sense of incompleteness I'd carried my entire life, the feeling that half of me was missing. We were two halves of the same person, finally whole for just a brief moment before death separated us again. But this time the separation didn't feel like abandonment, it felt like completion. I'd stayed for his funeral, a small private affair that was nothing like the elaborate memorial service his lawyers had planned. Instead, we buried him in a simple grave next to the empty headstone he'd erected for me all those years ago. Now the twins were together, even if one of the graves would forever remain empty. After the funeral, I'd done something that surprised everyone, including myself. I disappeared. Not dramatically, not with fanfare or explanations. I'd simply gotten in my truck, which Reginald had somehow managed to repair and fill with gas during those final weeks with Robert. And I'd driven west. No destination in mind, no plan beyond putting distance between myself and everything that had defined my old life. I'd been Barry Mitchell, the failure, for 58 years. Now I wanted to find out who Barry Montgomery might be. The journey had taken me through small towns and big cities, past landscapes I'd never imagined seeing. I'd stopped whenever something caught my interest, stayed as long as I felt like staying, moved on when restlessness struck. I'd worked odd jobs to pay for food and gas, construction work in Kansas, dishwashing in Colorado, helping an elderly rancher in Wyoming repair his fences. I'd slept in my truck some nights, in cheap motels others, and occasionally in the spare bedrooms of people who'd shown kindness to a stranger passing through. I'd learned that there were still good people in the world, people who helped others without expecting anything in return. I'd also learned that I was stronger than I'd ever believed possible. During those 6 months, I'd received exactly 3 phone calls about my inheritance. The first came from Harrison, Blackwood and Associates, informing me that Amanda had attempted to claim widow's rights to Robert's estate. When they'd explained that she'd never been married to Robert Montgomery and that her ex-husband Barry Mitchell had been declared legally dead following his disappearance, she'd hung up on them. The second call came from Sarah, who had somehow obtained the law firm's number. She'd left a voicemail that I'd listened to exactly once. "Dad, I heard about Uncle Robert and the money. I know we haven't spoken, but family is family, right? Maybe we should talk." I'd deleted the message without calling her back. The third call came just last week, from David Garrett. Amanda's relationship with him had apparently soured when she discovered he had no access to my newfound wealth. She told him about the inheritance, probably hoping he could help her claim some portion of it. "Barry," his smooth voice had said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding between all of us. Amanda's been going through a difficult time, and she realizes now that she made some mistakes. She'd like to work things out, maybe explore reconciliation." I'd hung up without saying a word. None of them understood that Barry Mitchell, the man they'd known, used and discarded, was gone. Not dead exactly, but transformed into someone they wouldn't recognize. I'd spent 6 months learning to forgive, not because they deserved it, but because carrying their betrayals was weighing me down. I'd chosen healing over revenge, not because it was easy, but because revenge would have made me into the kind of person Robert had spent his life trying not to become. Most importantly, I discovered that true wealth had nothing to do with the numbers in a bank account. It was sitting around a campfire with strangers who'd become friends for a night, sharing stories and coffee under a sky full of stars. It was helping a young mother change her flat tire on a lonely highway, and seeing the relief in her eyes when she realized she wasn't alone. It was listening to an elderly man in a diner in Nebraska tell stories about his late wife and understanding that love could endure even death. It was learning that I could be useful, valuable, even cherished by people who knew nothing about my past or my potential future wealth. I'd become someone who mattered, not because of what I could provide, but because of who I'd chosen to be. Now, sitting in this Portland cafe with rain pattering against the windows, I opened my letter to the lawyers one final time. To whom it may concern, 6 months ago you asked me to determine whether I had met the conditions for inheriting the Montgomery estate. After careful consideration, I can definitively say that I have. I have learned to forgive those who wronged me, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve freedom from anger. I have chosen to walk away from revenge, not because justice doesn't matter, but because mercy matters more. I have discovered that true wealth lies in the connections we make with others, in the lives we touch, in the love we give freely without expecting anything in return. However, I must respectfully decline the inheritance. The Montgomery fortune represents everything that was wrong with the family that created it. It represents the belief that money can solve problems that require human compassion. It represents the idea that some people matter more than others based on their bank account balances. I am not declining because I feel unworthy. I am declining because I have learned that I am worth more than any amount of money could ever represent. Please distribute the entire estate among the charities Robert and I discussed during his final weeks, with particular attention to organizations that help homeless individuals find stable housing and employment. The Montgomery name ends with this generation, and I believe that's exactly as it should be. With respect and gratitude, Barry Montgomery, formerly Mitchell. I sealed the letter in an envelope and walked to the post office, where I mailed it with no return address. Then I got back in my truck and continued west, toward the ocean I'd never seen but had always dreamed of visiting. 3 days later, I stood on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, watching waves crash against the rocks below. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that no amount of money could ever purchase. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw a number I didn't recognize. Probably another lawyer or relative who'd discovered my existence and wanted to discuss my responsibilities. I turned off the phone and threw it into the ocean, watching it disappear beneath the waves. Barry Mitchell's phone, containing contacts for people who'd never really known him, was gone forever. Barry Montgomery didn't need a phone. He had all the connections that mattered right here, to himself, to the natural world around him, to the possibility of tomorrow. A week later, I found myself in a small coastal town where a local church was advertising for a handyman. The pay was minimal, but they offered a small apartment above their fellowship hall and 3 meals a day. I took the job. The pastor, a woman in her 40s named Eleanor, didn't ask about my past when I showed up for the interview. She just looked at my hands, calloused from months of honest work, and my eyes, which apparently showed something she recognized. "You've been through something difficult," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Are you running from it or toward something better?" I thought about the question for a moment. "Both, I think." Eleanor smiled. "That's the most honest answer I've heard in years. When can you start?" That was 3 weeks ago. Now I wake up every morning in a small but comfortable apartment that overlooks the ocean. I fix broken things for people who truly appreciate the help. I eat dinner with Eleanor and her husband, Marcus, listening to stories about their congregation and their community. I've made friends with Tom, a retired fisherman who teaches me about the tides and the weather. I've helped babysit for Maria, a young single mother who works double shifts at the local diner and reminds me that strength comes in many forms. Yesterday, Elena asked me if I'd be interested in leading a support group for men who'd experienced major life transitions. "You have something to offer," she said. "You've been where they are, and you've found your way to something better." I said yes. Tomorrow I'll sit in a circle with strangers who are struggling with divorce, job loss, family rejection, addiction, and a dozen other crises that can make a man question his worth. I'll tell them what I've learned, that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover that you were never really lost at all. I'll tell them that forgiveness isn't about the people who hurt you. It's about refusing to let their actions define your future. I'll tell them that true strength isn't about providing for others or being needed. It's about being genuinely useful, genuinely kind, genuinely present in your own life. And if they're ready to hear it, I'll tell them the most important thing I've discovered, that you don't have to be anyone other than who you really are. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. My wife had betrayed me, my daughter had rejected me, and I was sleeping